I'm delighted once again to be joined by Lesia Dubenko. And for those who've seen our previous videos, you will know that they are not short on passion, intensity, and occasionally the odd outrageous statement. Well, that's exactly what we're looking for today as well. Lesia, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
And before we go in, do you want to give just a quick sentence about yourself? What are you involved in? What's your sort of professional capacity at this point? What's your area of expertise? Just to give those who haven't seen the previous videos a little bit of context.
So basically, I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I was featured in like many different outlets, including the Financial Times, Politico Europe, and many others. Currently, I'm affiliated with Euromaidan Press, so I do social media for them. And basically, I also have like independent projects, like my own Substack, and just doing a little bit of this, doing a little bit of that, running my Twitter, and having a lot of fun apparently while at it.
That's fantastic. And of course, your views, I think, are not unrealistic when it comes to how Ukrainians see the world. And of course, I think it's an unvarnished. Ukrainians are there at the front line. They also know Russia over many generations, over even hundreds of years, so perhaps don't suffer from the same delusions and illusions that many in the West do. And it's one of those illusions we're going to tackle straight off, and that is conversations that are happening in some capitals at least, not all, and not all politicians. And actually, I think in the Baltics and Nordics, they're really not comfortable with these. But the idea that somehow the idea is gaining traction again, unfortunately, that somehow the lines of contact could be frozen, that Russia could be persuaded to stop fighting, and you temporarily let them sort of keep their ill-gotten gains and the territory they've stolen. Why is this an extraordinarily, not just a bad idea, but even to give out hints and signals that you're thinking this kind of thing? Why is this not good?
Well, because every war has an ultimate goal, right? And Russia's ultimate goal is to subjugate Ukraine. Its also ultimate goal is to conquer other countries. And they're making it clear almost daily. If you watch their TV shows and stuff, they're constantly saying that they want to attack the Baltic states, that they want to attack Poland, that they want to raise London to the ground. That it's every day. It's not even like, it's not like they're hiding it. Obviously, they're exaggerating to some extent, perhaps, because they want to cater to their audience, and their audience apparently loves it. But it's still, when somebody tells you something, it actually makes sense to listen to them. And when somebody tells you that they want to raise London to the ground or to conquer somebody, it's probably because they want to do it. A totally different story is how you react to it, right? So if somebody tells you that, okay, you know what, I want to nuke you, you say, you know what, if you nuke me, I'll nuke you, and stuff like that. It's like, you have to be bold. And this is something that I don't see in the West. It's always this, oh yeah, but maybe a little bit of this, but maybe we'll find a compromise. How? How can you find a compromise with a person who wants to kill you? It just doesn't make any sense to me. So if you freeze a conflict, say that it happens, because Russia is also like not in the greatest economic position and so on. But even if you do that, how will you like organize this time, in the sense of will you let Ukraine join NATO? Parts of the non-occupied Ukraine join NATO? Or how does it work? Because without NATO membership, it's just like, it's going to happen. The war will happen again in 4 or 5 years, maybe even less than that. So it doesn't make any sense to me unless you say that, okay, Ukraine is now part of NATO, and Ukraine agrees to that. And it says that, like, okay, we're exchanging membership for the territories, for lost territories. Then at least it kind of makes sense, okay? Then at least it's there's something in it. But if you don't get anything and you just freeze the whole thing, then what do you expect? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
And this seems to be based on an illusion. And this is one where, in the early days of the war, I went to a lot of events. You get sort of elderly journalists, you get elderly diplomats, and they're locked into this idea that you have West Ukraine and East Ukraine. You have almost this fantasy of ethnic Russians who somehow are not Ukrainian, but also that the dispute is territorial. And I spoke to a few of these old buffers. I tried to hold myself back from being incredibly rude to them. It was difficult at times. But they'd say, okay, well, what about why don't we just, why don't we just let Russia keep Crimea? And then, this could all be over. To frame it in terms of territory seems, I think, to miss not just the point of what's actually happened these last 10 years, but to miss the intent of Putin. Surely Putin's intent is to turn Ukraine into a basket case, a dysfunctional country, so that he can dismember it piece by piece. And it's not about territory in that sense. It's about the erasure of Ukrainianism, the erasure of Ukrainian culture, language, and everything else. This is blindingly obvious, I think, to you and I. But any discussions in the corridors of power about somehow freezing this seems to hark back to the idea that this is a territorial conflict.
I think that a lot of it has to do with actually Ukraine not being able to fully communicate what it's about. Because, like, before 2022, I would say that Ukrainian communication in general to the wider public was subpar. That's smiley put. And Russia has a lot of resources compared to Ukraine when it comes to communicating messages. And it also has a lot of friends, a lot of networks. And, we want to say hi to Samuel again, right? And it's things like that. And Russia has a huge resource, and Ukraine wasn't doing a good enough job. So to many people, it makes sense. Even to many Ukrainians, what you're saying kind of makes sense because I don't want to I don't want to claim that Ukraine is very homogeneous in terms of people loving each other. There is a certain division between Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine. This has to be acknowledged. But it doesn't mean that just because you have a division, that means you can okay, let somebody else keep part of your country because, Germany is also divided. Everyone knows it. And a lot of countries have a lot of problems with each other in terms of being together. Italy, whatnot, Spain, but that doesn't mean that somebody can just come around and take a piece of your territory because that doesn't make any sense. And that's one part of it. And the second one is about international law. Because it doesn't, again, if you want to keep the system that we live in today, the international based law system, right? Then it doesn't, again, this argument doesn't make any sense. Okay, yeah, well, somebody speaks Russian in Crimea. Correct. They speak Russian and they have always spoken Russian. They are Russified. They're the more Russified. But it's but again, if you look at the history of Crimea and how people were deported and how people were Crimean Tatars, not only Tatars, other groups too. I forgot their names right now, but we can look it up later. It's a lot of people who lived there were deported. They were just simply said, this is no longer your land. And now Russians are coming around. This is exactly what Russians are doing again right now in the occupied territory. So they either kill or they make Ukrainians take passports, or they just simply bring their own people because they build all these buildings, for example, in Mariupol or Donetsk or wherever, and say that you can buy a place here, people in Russia, they tell them that this mortgage thing, the interest rate is amazing. Come around, and people do come around because for many people it's simply it's a dream to have a place of their own, and why not? Why not have it in Mariupol, which is next to the sea, right? So why not? And this is how Russia rules. It's nothing new. And actually, it's how every empire more or less rolls. Even the only difference is, for example, that the British Empire, which was also once quite controversial, let's put it that way, it never aimed as much at eradicating kind of people that they subjugated. In India, they accepted the culture. Obviously it was an inferior culture in their view, but they accepted the culture. They didn't erase it. They even took parts of it, and they still say that this is Indian culture. And Russia does a completely different thing. It comes around, it erases your identity, and then it claims that everything here is Russian. So this is the chief difference between the Russian type of imperialism and Western type of imperialism. Let's put it that way.
Yes, it's I'd almost describe it as parasitic. Well, I want to come back to something you said earlier because unfortunately you and I both watch a lot of these Russian propaganda programs. And obviously, if you can understand them in the original, the full toxicity comes through, but not just the toxicity, the normality, because they're talking a language which every Russian can understand. And whether they believe it or whether they don't, it's also wrapped in an entertainment format that people can watch. They don't have to believe every word, but if they participate by watching the entertainment format, I think that is a form of complicity. Now, Vladimir Solovyov, a couple of days before, notably, Israel struck Russian air bases in Syria, which, yes, it's had some mention in the media, but far too little, because I think this is a moment of huge, huge significance. Solovyov, a few days before that, basically said, we're at war with Israel. Whether they know it or not, whether the world knows it or not, we're at war with Israel. And he went on one of his big rants. What he's basically doing here is saying, if you do this, this, and this, then we're just going to threaten you. We're going to threaten like we threaten nuclear thing. We're not really at war, but here's me telling you what's going to happen because we carry a big stick, etc. 2 days later, Israel, and we're not going to talk about Gaza and stuff because that is an absolute can of worms, and we're not making any moral judgment around that. But in this case, they've identified that bases are supplying weapons to Hezbollah. Those weapons are coming from Russia. They're using Syrian air bases to do it. And they wipe them out. They don't fear that this will trigger World War III. They don't fear that they will literally be at war with Russia at that point. But they protect their interests and they recognize there's an axis of intolerance who are aiding each other with arms, equipment, and training. And boom, they took it out. And it was glorious. Why on earth, why on earth cannot strikes on Ukraine be seen in the same light by Western allies?
Well, to begin with, let's be honest, Israel is a rich country. It's a country that supplies technology to the US. So I mean, the security guarantees that they have with the US isn't some kind of charity fund. Because I watched actually an interview by an Israeli military expert a while ago, and he said that everything that US does, it does for a reason. It's not a charity fund. So they supply certain technology, and they are also rich, and they also have nukes, something that we are deprived of, and something that I think Ukraine should be like, talking about the responsibility of those people who basically decided this is a good idea. And because everyone kind of knew, I mean, okay, I'm quite young in terms of like, commenting on what was happening in the 1990s or 1980s, but I'm sure that the generation which was like, in power back then knew what Russia was, and a lot of that a lot of what's happening today is predictable. So how come they decided that it's a good idea to just, say that take my nukes, it's fine. Come on. And now we're left with no nukes, no ballistic missiles, which are like being developed right now. So this is where I have to criticize Ukraine. Why the hell are we developing ballistic missiles in 2024? What were we up to all this time? It's like, but these questions, okay, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, maybe during another show. But Israel has one huge tech power. So they are a very developed country in that respect. Second, they have nukes. And third, they are just like that. So if you know Israeli people and how they roll, they are very blunt and they're not scared. Because to them, this, like, doesn't, like, they don't care. They don't care. They do what's in their interest. And I guess it's right. I guess it's right because they are protecting their people and they want to live in a country where Hezbollah or Hamas, which by the way receive weapons from Russia, and this is something that's been confirmed to me, like personally, by people who were there in Gaza and other places and saw the like the Russian weapons. So when it comes to Israel knowing who supplies this, because originally, if you recall this statement by Medvedev and somebody else, they claimed that Ukraine sold weapons to Hamas and stuff. Israel is like, no, no, this is so bad. This is like so untrue that we're not even going to comment on this. And So, they are just not afraid. And this is how you're supposed to be. So, but, they didn't really strike the airbase, I believe, that Russia has. It's something next to the airbase. But still, they made a statement. They made a
Ammo
statement.
dumps, wasn't it? It was ammo dumps. It was ammo dumps next to the. So they hit
Yeah,
the
exactly,
shipment of
exactly. And I
weapons.
think
Yeah.
that, I mean, I can't confirm this, but reportedly, Russia tried to down their missiles, So, I mean, Israel just is like just like that. It's just like that. It's a country that wants to protect itself, and I guess it has the right to do so because it is also being attacked all the time, whether by Hamas or by somebody else. It's like Iran, and I think that what's going on right now in the Middle East is, I mean, it's dangerous, obviously, but it's also necessary because if you don't stand up to countries like Iran, like what's going to happen next? They will get nuclear weapons at some point with the
Mm.
help of Russia or somebody else. And what's going to happen next? We're going to start like, nuking each other. I don't know. Maybe the world will be happy
Well, this is
once
the interesting
everyone's
point.
gone.
I think because they have that lack of fear, and also for many, many decades have lived in that sense that you're living with existential danger every day and all the time, but you also have to carry on with your life. I think gives a certain clarity to the actual risks and the scale of those risks. Occasionally, the reaction to those risks may be overblown, and I think Israelis are potentially guilty of that sometimes in putting far more force into something than is required to crack a particular nut. We won't get into that, but in this instance, they've made a calculation. Russia knows it's doing something wrong. Russia knows it's doing something that it will not want to make a big deal out of. You're essentially exposing a kind of crime. And by taking out that ammo, it will not trigger World War III because Russia will be like, oh, okay, that's a bit punchy, but it's also realistic. What should the Allies be learning from this? Because essentially, if the Western Allies were to say, look, Ukraine is a sovereign territory, we're not going to strike Russia with the ATACMS. We know that, many people are uncomfortable with that, but we will take anything out on the sovereign territory of Russia. We know it won't trigger World War III because this is not Russian territory, but they won't go there. That seems to me the lesson that can be drawn from what Israel has done. And we'll have to keep it brief because I have to jump off.
Yes. I mean, you're totally right here. And the only thing I can add is that, I honestly think sometimes that it's not really about somebody not understanding that, okay, if you strike something in Russia, it's not going to trigger World War III. It just seems to me that somehow, even despite all of what's going on, people want the normality back, And the normality by basically rebuilding bridges with Russia. Because let's be honest, to this day, Russians travel abroad. I saw them in Greece. I saw them in other places. They travel to the UK. They travel to the US, you know? So obviously there are people who sanction, but regular people still do that, those who
Yes.
support him too. So, it just feels like the West doesn't want to cut off the ties with Russia, and this is why it's happening because, Iran is not that is not that interesting to it. But Russia seems to be somehow, I don't know, whether due to resources or maybe just like, these historical ties and stuff and culture, Dostoevsky or whatnot, different reasons. But
That's
yeah,
also resources, though, isn't it, Lesia? I mean, the fact that Russian soft power works is in itself a factor of the immense wealth that's been placed into creating that soft power. There's a resources at the heart of all of those things.
absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is that I don't really understand why the West wants that. So I think that this is something that you guys basically should like contemplate. Why do you need Russia so much somehow, despite knowing what it is, despite like everything, despite seeing the war in like real time, because there are people probably in the Pentagon or other places who can watch it almost in real time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like you know what's going on, and still there's something inside you that is like, I can't break up with this country. It's like a toxic boyfriend or a toxic girlfriend of some sort. I don't know. It's like this toxic kind of relationship that you're still drawn to, and you just simply can't let it go. But you should, because when you just cut off ties with toxic people, somehow your life becomes better. And you can find alternative resources if you need them so much. And you can build a new economic model and not rely on cheap gas that is being weaponized by Russia. You can do all of that, but for that you have to have like a different approach to what's going on and say that no, I've had enough of this, and it's not going to change, because after Putin there will be Putin, Shmutin, Babutin, whoever else is like, and they will do absolutely the same, because Russia will never ever change. It will not change. It will not become democratic. It will not become this happy nation kind of stuff thing. It will not, okay? It's a country whose entire agenda is about conquering, killing, subjugating, and humiliating.
And stealing.
Yes, it's how it's just how they are, and just accept it and just live with it. And obviously it won't go away. It won't like evaporate, but you need to have a completely different type of relationship with it. Because even if, say, that one day Navalny or somebody like that takes over, I'm pretty sure you've heard that statement made by her that, oh, but it's like, what decolonization? They don't even like, even the so-called liberal opposition doesn't understand what Russia is. What do you expect from everybody else? Okay? It's like she doesn't want to decolonize because she thinks that it's okay the way it is.
And
She
we'll need
thinks
to
that
pick.
she doesn't, maybe she does it deliberately, maybe not, but it's how she is. And it's how Russia is in general and its people.
There's so many things there to pick up in our next episode. This is a nice, quick, intense one. I hope people get sort of value from that. We will be picking up some of these themes in our next discussion. Lesia, thank you so much.
Thank you.